The sound was the first thing that broke you. Not the sight, not the smell, but the sound. It was a singular solid object, a monolithic roar that had stopped being wind 24 hours ago and had become a physical presence, a giant standing outside the walls of St. Jude's pressing in. This was hour 24 for Sarah, or maybe 25. The sky had been a bruised, yellowish black for so long that time had become a liquid. The lights in the NICU flickered, buzzed, and died, plunging the room into a terrifying, murky darkness, lit only by the green glow of battery-powered monitors. "No, no, no," Sarah whispered, her voice already a dry rasp. The light snapped back on, a harsh, humming fluorescent glare. The backup generator had caught, for now. Beside her, the incubator for the preemie, born at 28 weeks just as the first storm bands had hit, flickered. The baby, too small to be named, was wrapped in plastic, its chest a tiny, fluttering thing. "It's okay, baby," Sarah murmured, her hand steady despite the adrenaline, checking the vent tube. She was the most senior RN on the floor, which meant she was now in charge of everything. The three other nurses on shift with her were fresh, wide-eyed, and looked to her as if she held some divine truth. She had none. Only a checklist in her head. "Gail," she barked, not looking away from the incubator. "The generator is cutting out. I need you to find an orderly. Find anyone. Find more diesel. I don't care how. Go." Gail, a 20-year-old with "Believe" tattooed on her wrist, just nodded, her face pale, and ran. The roar outside intensified, and the boards over the windows didn't just rattle. They bowed, a convex curve of plywood that seemed to inhale and exhale. Then, a new sound. A wet, percussive thump. "What was that?" the last nurse, Ben, asked. Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving, grabbing a manual resuscitation bag, an ambo bag from the wall. The lights flickered again. This time they stayed off. The high-pitched whee of the vent died, and the battery monitors began their steady, ominous beeping. "Ben, get the flashlights from the crash cart. Put your phone light on. Aim it here." The room was plunged into the thin, blue-white glare of an iPhone. Sarah opened the incubator's port, unhooked the vent, and attached the ambu bag. She began to squeeze. A steady, rhythmic whoosh puff. Inhale, exhale. She was breathing for the baby. "This is all we are now, yes," she thought, her mind strangely calm. A pair of lungs. It was in this moment, squeezing a small bag to keep a 1-pound human alive in the dark, while a Category 4 hurricane tried to peel the roof off the building, that Mark Jennings found her. Jennings was not a doctor. He was, as he'd proudly announced in his first all-staff meeting, an MBA with a focus on healthcare logistics. He was wearing a fresh, pressed polo shirt, somehow even now, and held a laminated binder. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight. He had to yell over the wind. "We have a situation." "I've got about 3, Mark," Sarah said, not breaking her rhythm. Whoosh, puff. "The first floor is taking on water, but that's not it. The main town shelter at the high school, the roof's gone." A cold dread, colder than the floodwater, seeped into Sarah. "How many?" "They're saying 3, maybe 400. They're evacuating them here." Sarah squeezed the bag. Whoosh, puff. "Here, Mark, we're a 30-bed hospital. We're on generator power. The first floor is flooding." "Where here?" "The lobby, the cafeteria." "I don't know," he snapped, his corporate composure cracking. "But that's why I'm here. We're initiating the mass casualty protocol. I need you to—" He was interrupted by a sound that was not the wind. It was a splintering, tearing crash from the floor below, followed by a chorus of screams. "What the hell was that?" Ben whispered, his flashlight beam wavering. "The surge," Sarah said. Her knuckles were white on the ambu bag. "The ocean is in the lobby." "Sarah," Jennings said, his voice now an octave higher. "The protocol, we have to start tagging. We need to be tracking every patient, every evacuee for FEMA reimbursement. If we don't have the paperwork, the hospital will be bankrupt by the time this is over. We won't exist." Sarah stopped. She looked up from the tiny, fragile life in the box. She stared at Mark Jennings, at his dry hair, his binder, his panicked, unseeing eyes. The world was ending. The ocean was in the building. She was manually breathing for a baby, and he was talking about paperwork. The rage that hit her was so pure, so bright, it cut through her exhaustion like a surgeon's blade. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her voice became steel. "Ben," she said, her eyes locked on Jennings. "Take the bag. One squeeze every 3 seconds. Do not stop. Do not move." Ben, shaking, took her place. Whoosh puff. Sarah stood up. She was 5'5", but she felt 10 feet tall. She walked over to Jennings, who instinctively took a step back, his binder held up like a shield. "The vents," she said, her voice a low growl. What? "The other babies, the ones on the battery backup vents. Their batteries will last 4 hours. We have to move them, now. We have to move the whole NICU to the 3rd-floor conference room. It's the furthest from the windows and the water." "But the tagging," he stammered. "The protocol." Sarah took a step closer, invading his space. She could smell his expensive, nervous sweat. "Mark," she said, "are you going to stand here and talk about tagging? Or are you going to help me move the vents?" Jennings stared at her. He saw not a nurse, but a terrifying force of nature that had just been unleashed, something wilder and more focused than the storm outside. He dropped his binder. The laminated pages skittered across the floor. What do I carry?" he whispered. "You're not carrying," Sarah said, grabbing the side of the nearest incubator. "You're pushing." The wind howled, and St. Jude's became an island. The battle had begun. By hour 36, the hospital was no longer a hospital. It was a makeshift fortress, a damp concrete ark floating in a churning sea of debris, floodwater, and the town's collective terror. The first floor was a memory. The ER was the lobby was the cafeteria, and the cafeteria was a scene from a war zone. The 300 survivors from the high school shelter had arrived not as a line, but as a wave of hypothermic, injured, and panicked humanity. They were old, they were young, they were screaming, they were silent. Sarah, having successfully moved the entire NICU to the 3rd-floor conference room, now a hot, crowded nest of beeping machines and crying infants, had descended into the chaos. Jennings, to his credit, had pushed the incubator, his face a mask of pale shock, and had not mentioned FEMA since. He was now huddled in his office, his door closed. "We need order," Sarah had declared, her voice cutting through the din in the cafeteria turned ER. The few doctors on call were busy with critical surgeries on the 2nd floor. Down here, it was just her, Ben, Gail, and a handful of orderlies. "Okay, listen," Sarah shouted, standing on a cafeteria table. "We need a system. If you can walk and talk, you go to the waiting room. If you are bleeding, you come here. If you cannot breathe, you are first. We need supplies." She found a box of colored tape in a supply closet. Red for critical, yellow for can wait, green for walking wounded, black for... She paused, swallowing. Black for too late. She became a general, a whirlwind of motion. She wasn't just Sarah, RN, anymore. She was the one who decided. Her triage was brutal, efficient, and final. She moved from body to body, her shears cutting through wet clothes, her hands assessing, her mouth barking orders. "Gail, pressure on this one. Ben, get a line in him. You." She pointed to a healthy-looking evacuee. "Hold this. Don't let go." This was how Dr. Evans found her. Dr. Evans was the hospital's star surgeon. He had, as he often reminded people, trained at Hopkins. He was arrogant, dismissive, and brilliant. He strode into the cafeteria, his blue scrubs immaculate, having just finished a complex internal repair. He looked at the chaos, and his upper lip curled in disdain. "What is this, a bazaar?" he boomed. "This, doctor," Sarah said, not looking up from a woman's leg, which had a piece of rebar sticking out of it, "is called triage. Grab a tag or grab a coffee, but get out of the way if you're not helping." Evans's eyes narrowed. "Nurse? Sarah, is it? I need your attention. I've got Mayor Thompson on a gurney. He has a compound fracture, a possible concussion, and he's complaining of chest pains. He's my priority. I need an OR prepped." Sarah finished applying a tourniquet to the woman's leg and tagged her red. Gail, get her upstairs, now! She finally stood and faced him. She was covered in God knows what. He was pristine. The mayor, she said. The one I tagged yellow an hour ago. The one who's been yelling at anyone who comes close. He is a public official, Evans said, his voice cold. And he may be having a cardiac event. He's not, Sarah said flatly. His EKG is clean. He's having a panic attack. I've got a 7-year-old girl in the corner, tagged red, who hasn't said a word in 3 hours. She was pulled from the water. Her abdomen is rigid. She's bleeding internally. She goes to the OR. The mayor can wait. Insubordination, Evans began, his face flushing crimson. It's not insubordination, doctor. It's math, Sarah shot back, her exhaustion making her fearless. She's a child with a critical, time-sensitive injury. He's a grown man who won't stop complaining. She goes first. Or do you want to explain to your board why you let a kid die so you could treat the mayor's anxiety? The entire cafeteria for a moment went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Dr. Evans stared at her, his jaw working. He saw her eyes, devoid of fear or deference, only a cold, hard calculus. He looked over at the girl, a small, still form on a gurney, then back at the mayor, who was currently yelling at an orderly about his cell phone. With a sharp huff, Evans turned. Fine, he snapped. Prep the girl for an exploratory lap, but this conversation, nurse, is not over. Good, Sarah said, already turning away. Ben, let's get this man's shoulder back in its socket. The seed of respect, tiny and hard, had been planted. But another conflict was brewing. By hour 48, the rain had lessened, but the hospital was still cut off. The main problem was no longer trauma, it was infection. The floodwater was a toxic soup of sewage, chemicals, and seawater. Every cut, every scrape was a breeding ground for sepsis. We're burning through antibiotics, Sarah told Ben, her hands shaking as she drew up another dose of Rocephin. At this rate, we'll be out by tomorrow. We need to get into the main dispensary, Ben said. That's where the high-dose stuff is. The main dispensary was on the second floor behind a heavy, steel-plated door with a digital lock. And it was locked. Sarah found Mark Jennings in his office, on a satellite phone. No, I can't confirm the numbers, Senator, but the asset integrity is compromised, he was saying. Sarah knocked on the doorframe. He waved her away. Sarah walked in and pressed the end call button on the phone cradle. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Jennings shrieked, jumping to his feet. I need the code for the main dispensary, now. Jennings' face transformed from shock to a strange, bureaucratic firmness. Absolutely not. Excuse me? The dispensary is our single most valuable asset, he said, puffing up his chest. It contains millions of dollars in controlled substances. With the power out and the situation unstable. Opening it would be an invitation to looting. It remains sealed. It remains until we have secured a proper chain of custody. Hospital protocol. Sarah stared at him. Mark, I have 20 patients turning septic. That rebar I pulled out of a woman? Her leg is red up to the knee. If I don't get broad-spectrum antibiotics into her, I'm going to be amputating it on a cafeteria table. I don't care about your chain of custody. Give me the code. No, Jennings said, crossing his arms. It's a security risk. We have to protect the hospital's assets. Sarah's vision narrowed. She saw the mother of a young boy in the corner of her eye. The boy had a gash on his forehead, and he was shivering. He had diabetes, and his mother, Anna, had been crying for an hour. They'd lost their insulin in the flood. The hospital's refrigerated supply was on the first floor, now part of an artificial reef. These people, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, are the assets, Mark, the only ones that matter. She walked past him to the wall-mounted emergency override box. In it was a small red hammer and a key. She smashed the glass with her elbow, ignoring the sting, grabbed the key, and walked to the dispensary door. You do that, Sarah, and I'll have you fired, Jennings yelled, following her. I'll have you arrested. That's destruction of property. Sarah ignored him, jamming the key into the manual override slot. The lock beeped and the heavy door hissed open. She stepped inside the dark, cool room and flicked on her flashlight. Rows and rows of drugs. It was beautiful. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers," Jennings sputtered from the doorway, a small, useless man. Sarah grabbed a box of vancomycin and a tray of Zosyn. She walked back out, pushing past him. She stopped and looked back at him. "Good. You tell them to send the bill." As she walked away, she saw the diabetic boy, Alex. His mother, Anna, looked at her with desperate eyes. "His sugar is crashing," Anna whispered. "I don't know what to do." Sarah's supply was compromised. The pharmacy was a wreck. But she remembered. Her locker, on the 3rd floor by the staff lounge. She always kept a personal emergency stash. A glucagon pen, some saline, and 2 vials of Humalog for her own emergency. She ran up the stairs, her legs burning. She tore her locker open. The vials were there. She ran back down. She didn't ask. She didn't chart it. She just knelt beside the boy, prepped the injection, and pushed the insulin. "It's okay, Alex," she said, her hand on his small, cold forehead. "It's okay. We've got you." She had just given away her own lifeline. She was running on nothing. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a hollow cord exhaustion. And the siege had barely begun. Hour 48 bled into hour 72, and then 96. The world became a humid, foul-smelling loop of suffering and small, desperate tasks. The water outside had receded, leaving a thick, gray-black sludge on everything, a toxic soup that coated the world. The smell was the worst part, a putrid combination of seawater, sewage, rot, and the unmistakable, sweet, coppery scent of drying blood. St. Jude's was an island of misery. The power was still a lie, the generator coughing and sputtering, demanding diesel they didn't have. They'd cannibalized every drop from the hospital's lawnmowers, the maintenance trucks, even siphoning it from abandoned cars in the parking lot. Sarah was a ghost, a filthy, vibrating ghost. She hadn't slept. She'd tried once for 20 minutes in a chair, but the sudden silence of her own mind was so loud, so full of the things she hadn't been able to do, that she'd jolted awake, gasping. Sleep was a luxury. Coffee was the currency. They were now on the last sludgy dregs, boiled and reboiled over a Bunsen burner from the lab. She was hallucinating. The walls seemed to breathe. In the periphery of her vision, the patterns on the linoleum floor would swirl and writhe like snakes. A few times she'd heard her name called, only to turn to an empty, debris-strewn hallway. She was stitching up a cut on a cop's forearm. He was a big man, his uniform torn and stained, but his presence was a small comfort. He was the first sign of organized authority she'd seen in 2 days. "My name's Miller," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't wince as she pulled the suture tight. "Sarah," she replied, her voice a croak. She was using a dental floss thin suture from a dental kit. They'd run out of 4O silks a day ago. "You've been here the whole time, haven't you, nurse?" he asked, watching her. "We're all here," she said, her hands moving with an automatic, practiced grace. The flashlight she'd duct-taped to her scrubs was wavering. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't keep the beam steady. "Damn it," she hissed, pausing the stitch. "What's wrong?" "My hands, too much coffee, not enough anything." She took a breath, trying to will the fine tremor to stop. Officer Miller gently took the flashlight from her. He held it, his own large, steady hand illuminating the wound. "How's that?" Sarah looked at his hand, then at his face. His eyes were kind. She felt a sudden, ridiculous urge to cry. She hadn't cried once. Not when the vents failed, not when the levee broke, not when she'd tagged her first black tag. "Thank you," she whispered, and went back to stitching. "Please hold it steady." He was humbled. He was a man with a gun and a badge, a symbol of order, and in this moment, he was a lampstand for a 5'5", 120-pound nurse who was holding the world together with dental floss. He was still holding the light when the shouting started. "They're here! The guard! The guard is here!" A cheer, weak and ragged, went up from the cafeteria. People who hadn't moved in days were crawling to the windows. Sarah finished the last stitch, taped it down, and ran with Miller, her heart, for the first time, leaping with a dangerous, stupid hope. 2 olive drab Humvees and a massive deuce-and-a-half truck were idling in the sun. Sludge-covered parking lot. Soldiers in clean, dry uniforms were piling out. They looked like creatures from another planet. And then she saw him. Mark Jennings. He'd found a comb. He was jogging out of the hospital, his hand extended, a sycophantic, beaming smile on his face. "Lieutenant," Jennings shouted, "thank God you're here. I'm Mark Jennings, the administrator. We've been holding it down, but we are critical. We need an immediate evacuation. We need antibiotics, blood, insulin." The lieutenant, a man with a face like a stone, just nodded and cut him off. "Mr. Jennings, good to see you, sir. We're here on direct orders from the governor. Our primary mission is to secure vital city infrastructure." "Exactly," Jennings said, nodding eagerly. "This hospital is the most vital. Our orders are to secure the First National Bank vault and City Hall," the lieutenant said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The bank holds the city's bonds. City Hall holds the records. We're to establish a perimeter." Sarah, standing in the doorway, felt the hope in her chest turn to ash. "What?" she said. The word was so quiet the lieutenant didn't hear it. Jennings's smile faltered. "The bank? But we have children in here. We have dying people." "I have my orders, sir. We can't spare the manpower for a full evac. We can take 3, maybe 4 criticals if you have them ready. But my priority is the vault." "The vault," Miller repeated, his voice dangerously low as he stepped up beside Sarah. "Son, are you telling me you're guarding a pile of paper?" The lieutenant's eyes snapped to Miller. "I'm telling you, officer, that I'm following my orders. We all have a job to do." "Your job is right here," Miller roared, jabbing a thick finger toward the hospital. "There are people dying of infected cuts in there while you're going to go stand guard over a safe deposit box." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down," the lieutenant said, his hand dropping to the butt of his sidearm. It was Jennings who diffused it in the most sickening way possible. "Lieutenant," Jennings said, his voice slick and conspiratorial, "I understand completely. A man of your training. You understand the mission, the chain of command. Of course, perhaps you could spare 2 of your men." "Just 2, for this facility? We've had issues with security." The lieutenant considered. "Fine, I can spare 2. Where do you want them?" Sarah watched in numb horror as Mark Jennings pointed. "My office, yes," he said at the essay. "It's the administrative hub. It must be secured." The lieutenant nodded. "Done." He motioned to 2 soldiers. "You 2, with him, secure the admin wing." Sarah couldn't breathe. She was watching a nightmare. The National Guard, her saviors, were marching past the wounded, past the septic, past the dying children, to go stand guard outside Mark Jennings' office while he made calls on his satellite phone. "You bastard," Miller whispered, his voice thick with contempt, but Jennings was already strutting back inside, flanked by armed soldiers. "They're not for us, Miller," Sarah said, her voice hollow. She grabbed his arm, the one she'd just stitched. "Come on, nobody's coming to save us. We have to save ourselves." She turned and walked back into the stench. The breaking point came at hour 97. It came in the form of a crashing, grinding sound from the street. Looters, high and desperate in a stolen F-150, had T-boned a van full of survivors trying to reach the hospital. It was the definition of a mass casualty event. 10 critical patients, all at once. The cafeteria became a slaughterhouse. "We're out of Oneg!" Gail screamed from the makeshift blood bank. We're just out." "Then type them now," Sarah yelled. "We're out of reagent too." Dr. Evans, his arrogance long since sandblasted away by exhaustion and trauma, was working beside her. His hands were a blur, packing a chest wound. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, terrible. "This one. GCS of 3, fixed and dilated pupils, no spontaneous respiration." Sarah looked. A young man, maybe 19. His chest was moving, but only because she'd had Ben bagging him. She placed her stethoscope on his chest. Nothing. She shone her pen light in his eyes, black, empty pools. "He's brain dead," Evans whispered. But the one next to him, she's got a pulse, but she's bleeding out. She needs the blood in this. He held up a bag of A positive. But so does he, if we're going to, you know. He's already gone, Sarah said. But we've been bagging him, Ben cried, his face streaked with tears. We can't just stop. He's gone, Zara repeated, her voice flat. She reached over and pulled a black tag from her pocket. She laid it on his chest. Stop bagging him, Ben. Ben stared, his hands frozen on the ambu bag. Ben, stop! Sarah yelled. Give me that bag. Give it to the woman in the corner, the one with the asthma attack. Go! Ben stumbled away, sobbing. Sarah, Evans said, his voice cracking. He was looking at 3 more red-tagged patients, all bleeding and only one surgeon. I can't choose. Yes, you can. This one, he pointed. Bilateral femur fractures, possible pelvic. He'll bleed out in an hour. He pointed to the next. Open abdominal wound, evisceration. She'll be septic in 2. He pointed to the last. Sucking chest wound. He's got 10 minutes. The chest wound, Sarah said, grabbing a chest seal kit. He's first. He's the most salvageable. The ABD wound is next. The femur. He's yellow. He's not yellow, Sarah. He's dying. They're all dying, doctor. We're saving the ones we can save. Evans looked at the man with the femur fractures, a father who'd been whispering his kids' names. He looked at Sarah, and he broke. The star surgeon from Hopkins, the man who drove a Porsche, leaned against the sludge-covered wall, slid to the floor, and put his head in his hands. He began to sob, his entire body shaking. I can't, he whispered. It's too much. I can't. The entire ER, what was left of it, was looking at him. At their leader, their surgeon, utterly broken. Sarah felt nothing, no pity, no anger, just a vast, empty calm. She was beyond emotion. She was a machine. She walked over to Dr. Evans. She knelt in the filth in front of him. He flinched, expecting her to yell. She slapped him. It wasn't a hard slap. It was a sharp, stinging crack that echoed in the room. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. The sobs stopped. You don't have time for that, she said, her voice quiet. You can fall apart in 12 hours. You can cry all you want. But right now, that man with the chest wound has 9 minutes. Get up. She stood and offered him a bloody, gloved hand. He stared at her hand. He stared at her face, her eyes like 2 black stones. He saw the truth there. She was right. He took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. Okay, he said, his voice a wreck. And okay, the chest wound. Get me a kit. Already got it, she said, slapping it into his hand. We save the next one. He nodded, wiped his face, and went back to work. The 120th hour arrived without a watch. It came not as a time, but as a feeling. It was the sound of the wind finally dying, fading from a roar to a howl, then a whine, and then, impossibly, to silence. The silence was the loudest thing Sarah had ever heard. It was hour 120. 5 days. She was on autopilot. Her body was a foreign object, a heavy, aching machine she was piloting from a great distance. Her feet were swollen, her scrubs were stiff with a laminate of blood, coffee, and saline. She hadn't seen her own face in days, and she was glad. The last of the mass casualty victims was in the OR with Dr. Evans, the woman with the evisceration. Evans was in his element now, a focused, silent artist of repair. He hadn't said a word since the slap, just worked. The cafeteria was quiet. Not a good quiet, but an exhausted, beaten quiet. The green tags were sleeping. The yellow tags were groaning. The black tags? They'd been moved to the morgue, which was now the walk-in freezer. Sarah did one last round. She checked on the NICU, still safe on the 3rd floor. The generator, fed by the last drops of diesel, was holding. The preemie she'd bagged was alive. His ODA USATs were 94%. A miracle. She checked on Officer Miller. He was awake, organizing the walking wounded into a cleanup crew. He saw her and gave her a nod of profound shared respect. She checked on the diabetic boy, Alex. His mother, Anna, was asleep in a chair beside him, her hand clutching his. His color was good. His breathing was even. Sarah, without thinking, put her hand on his forehead. Cool, he was stable, her work was done. There was no one else to stitch, no one else to tag, no one else to save. The war, for a few hours, was over. She found herself in a hallway on the second floor. She was just walking. She didn't know where. She was looking for a place to stop. She couldn't sit in the cafeteria. She couldn't go to the staff lounge. Too many ghosts. She saw a door, supply closet 2B. She opened it. It was small, dark, and smelled of sterile gauze and cardboard. It was perfect. She stepped inside. She didn't faint. She didn't collapse. She just sat. She leaned her back against the cool, painted cinder block. She drew her knees to her chest. She rested her head on a large box of 4x4 gauze. The darkness was absolute. The silence was a blanket. Sarah closed her eyes, and for the first time in 5 days, she was gone. She woke to a noise, a steady, insistent hum. Not the guttural, coughing roar of the generator, but a clean, smooth, powerful hum. The sound of the main grid. She was disoriented. Her neck was a steel rod of pain. Her mouth tasted like rust. For a moment, she had no idea where she was. The supply closet. Then she saw the light. Not a flashlight, but a bright, clean, unwavering light coming from under the door. She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. She had to use the shelves to pull herself up, her entire body screaming in protest. Every joint was on fire. She pushed the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The world was new. The lights were on, all of them. The hallway was blindingly, accusingly bright. And it was clean. A man in a blue vest with FEMA printed on the back was pushing a large floor buffer. The hum was coming from his machine. The floor, which for 5 days had been covered in a film of filth, was now a shining, wet-streaked white. "Ma'am," the man said, shutting off his machine, "you're not supposed to be on this wing. This is still a cleanup zone." Sarah just stared. He was clean. His vest was clean. He smelled of soap. "Ma'am, are you okay? She looked down at herself. She was a horror. Her scrubs were dark brown, almost black, with dried-on everything. Her hair was matted to her head. Her hands, which she held up to the light, were raw, cracked, and stained. I work here," she whispered. Her voice was gone. "Oh," the man said, his face softening. "You're one of them. The ones who stayed." Jesus. She stumbled past him, a zombie in her own hospital. The world had changed while she'd been asleep. The sounds were all wrong. She heard new voices, loud, healthy, energetic. She smelled bleach, an overwhelming, beautiful chemical smell of bleach. She made her way to the cafeteria. The gurneys were gone. The blood was gone. The people were gone. In their place were tables stacked high with MREs, bottled water, and blankets. Volunteers in bright yellow shirts were handing out coffee. Real coffee. "Honey, you need to sit down?" A woman with a kind face and a Red Cross armband asked her. "You need to get checked out." Where are the patients?" Sarah asked. "They started the evac about 6 hours ago," the woman said, gently guiding Sarah to a chair. "The guard came back with buses. They're taking the non-criticals to the state shelter. The criticals were airlifted out. You slept through the whole thing." Sarah sat. She just sat. The war was over. They had won? She saw Dr. Evans across the room. He was showered. He was in fresh clothes. He was arguing with a FEMA official, pointing at a manifest. He looked normal, smaller, just a man. He saw her. His argument stopped. He just looked at her, this wreck, this ghost. He walked over. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and she looked at him. "You," he said, his voice thick. "You did good." "You too, doctor," she managed. "I need some air," she said. her voice sounding strange in this new, clean world. "Go," he said. "It's over. Go get some sun." She stood, her legs wobbly. She walked through the new, clean lobby. The smashed front doors had been covered with plywood. She pushed her way through a temporary plastic sheeting and stepped outside. The sun was blinding. It was a physical blow. She'd forgotten what it felt like. It was warm, the air was cool, and it smelled of pine and wet earth. The sewage smell finally washed away. The sky was a sharp, piercing, cloudless blue. She stood on the front steps of St. Jude's, blinking, a survivor on a new shore. The front lawn was a circus. It wasn't a hospital lawn anymore. It was a media staging area. A sea of white satellite vans, their dishes pointed to the sky, formed a perimeter. Cables snaked through the mud like electronic vines. Reporters with perfect hair and bright makeup spoke in hushed, serious tones to cameras. Sarah, a filthy, shambling creature from the days before, just stood on the top step, absorbing the sheer, jarring wrongness of it all. This was her battlefield. And now it was a set. A low, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack grew louder. A state helicopter, a sleek black and gold bird, was descending, whipping the mud and debris on the lawn into a frenzy. It landed on a pre-marked X with a practiced, military grace. And she saw him. Mark Jennings. He was wearing a different pressed shirt, a blue one. His hair was not just combed, it was parted, damp with product. He was jogging toward the helicopter, his face alight with the kind of pure, obsequious joy she hadn't known a human could express. The helicopter door slid open. Out stepped a man. He was tall, he was tan, he wore a brand new, crisp black windbreaker with the state seal embroidered over the heart. He looked, Sarah thought with a strange, detached clarity, camera ready. He was the governor. He hadn't been here for the wind. He hadn't been here for the water. He hadn't been here for the siege. But he was here now for the photo op. He stepped onto the muddy grass, his shoes, clean black boots, barely touching the ground before his aides laid down a small patch of flooring. He was smiling, a big white politician's smile. He was shaking hands with the National Guard lieutenant, slapping him on the shoulder. He was pointing, for the cameras, at the hospital as if he'd built it. Mark Jennings was at his side, babbling, impossible situation, Governor, but we held the line. Our protocols, our team, we just never gave up. Then the governor's press aide, a young woman with a frantic headset and a clipboard, spotted Sarah. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, this is perfect," she whispered to her boss. She pointed. "There, a real one." The governor's smile, which had been for the cameras, shifted. It refocused. He, the press aide, and the entire swarm of cameras began moving, like a single organism, toward Sarah. She was too tired, too stunned, to move. She just stood there, a piece of debris they were about to film. "And this," the governor boomed, his voice like a professional narrator, "this is what it's all about." He was in front of her. He smelled overwhelmingly of cologne and hairspray. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask if she was okay. He slung a heavy, clean arm around her shoulder, pulling her filthy, rigid body against his crisp windbreaker. It was a gesture of ownership. He was claiming her. The cameras swarmed, the shutters clicking like a million angry insects. Flashbulbs, white and blinding, exploded in her face. "This right here," the governor declared, his smile fixed, his eyes looking straight through her and at the lens, "is what resilience looks in. This is the spirit of our great state. We are so proud of our first responders, our nurses, our doctors. We will rebuild." Sarah said nothing. She couldn't. She was a prop. She was the before picture for his after speech. She could feel the heat of his body. She could smell the artificiality of his presence. This man was a lie. His clean hand on her shoulder was a desecration. And just behind him, nodding enthusiastically, his face a mask of smug self-congratulation, was Mark Jennings. He was taking credit for her pain, for her 120-hour shift, for the black tags, for the slap, for the supply closet. The rage she'd felt at Jennings in the NICU was a flicker. The rage she felt now was a cold, white-hot star, but she didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her eyes, adjusting to the strobing flashes, scanned the crowd. She looked past the governor's perfect, coiffed head. She saw them, On the ambulance bumper just outside the media scrum sat Officer Miller, his arm in a fresh sling. Next to him, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup, was Dr. Evans. He'd shed his arrogance like a second skin. He looked tired, but he was here, and standing near them, holding a small plastic-wrapped bundle, was Anna, the mother of the diabetic boy. She was waiting. Sarah felt the governor's hand on her shoulder, squeezing, posing. "A true hero," he said to a reporter. She looked at the flashes. She looked at the lie. Then she looked at her community. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah shrugged. It was a small movement, but it was enough. The governor's heavy arm, taken by surprise, slipped off her shoulder. She didn't push him. She didn't yell. She just turned and walked away. She walked right through the center of the media scrum. Reporters, stunned, parted for her. "Nurse, nurse, what's your name? What did you see?" She ignored them. She kept walking, a filthy, exhausted prophet, ignoring the false idol. She walked past the cameras, past the clean suits, past the lies. She walked over to the ambulance bumper and sat down, right between Miller and Evans. The governor's press conference was still happening. His voice was a meaningless, booming noise in the background. Dr. Evans didn't say a word. He just handed her his styrofoam cup of coffee. It was hot and black and bitter. "Thanks," she croaked. Then Anna, the boy's mother, stepped forward. She was crying but smiling. This is for you," she said. She held out the bundle. It was a blueberry muffin, probably from an MRE. "I can't," Sarah started. "Please," Anna whispered. "You saved my son. You saved us." Sarah looked at the muffin. She looked at Anna. She looked at Miller and at Evans. Her hands, still shaking, took the muffin. She unwrapped the plastic. She took a bite. It was sugary and dry and full of preservatives. And it was, without question, the best thing she had ever tasted in her entire life. She chewed, drank the bitter coffee, and sat in the bright, warm sun, surrounded by the only people who mattered. The noise of the governor faded until she couldn't hear it at all.